This video is looking at criteria for authenticity within authentic assessments. So what is authentic assessment? You can think of assessment as having two potential roles: the role of the academic requirements of a course and the role of the vocational requirements of the student after they leave the course and go into the world of work. So the vocational requirement has workplace skills and core knowledge they might need to survive in that particular discipline, and the academic element is the core knowledge and critical skills and analytical skills they require within the academic context. So authentic tasks are the intersection of those, so academic ideas that are embedded within workplace skills and knowledge. And those are transferable skills for both practical work and for lifelong learning as well. Wiggins identifies assessment as being authentic when it's used to directly examine student performance on what he refers to as worthy intellectual tasks. In that case, authentic assessments require students to be effective performers with knowledge that they've acquired over the course of their studies. Authentic assessments present a full array of tasks that mirror the priorities and challenges found in the best instructional activities and professional activities. Authentic assessments attend to whether the student can craft polished, thorough, justifiable answers or performances or products that are related to work activities and activities they will do outside of the academic environment. And they need to achieve validity and reliability by emphasizing and standardizing appropriate criteria that are used within the assessment activity that are related to authentic work level or outside or non-academic activities and products. Finally, authentic assessments need to involve ill-structured challenges, problematic activities, things that don't work perfectly, that haven't been planned out perfectly, in order to help students rehearse the complex ambiguities of professional life or the game of adult and professional life. Tasks are not authentic necessarily just because they're similar to real-world tasks, but they must mirror the complexity, collaboration and high-level thinking that's necessary for the most intellectual of professional problem-solving and decision-making activities. So authentic assessments act as instruction and skill-building opportunities, not just as tools of evaluation in this sort of a context. It helps to compare the characteristics of traditional versus authentic assessments. So traditional assessments are typically selecting an answer to a question or identifying a response to a question. They tend to be contrived. They tend to be activities that are done purely for the process of the assessment, and they often focus on recall and recognition or demonstration of an activity. They tend to be structured by the teacher, and they tend to give indirect evidence of competency. So you're talking about the ability to do an activity based on their knowledge recall or their ability to critique abstract information or theoretical ideas. Authentic assessments tend to focus more on performing a task rather than selecting a response or recalling some information. They tend to be based on real life activities rather than activities that are contrived just for the purpose of the assessment or for the purpose of the teaching. And they tend to focus more on constructing things or applying ideas and solving problems and creating new ways of doing things rather than recall, recognition and analysis. They tend to be more student structured and student focused than teacher focused, though that's not always the case. And they tend to have direct evidence of competency by actually performing a relevant task rather than performing something that has a vague analogy to that relevant task. Coe identified some criteria for authenticity in assessment. These are summarised here. So firstly, authentic assessments are realistic. They require students to make good judgments and be creative. They require students to deeply engage with the subject and the discipline. They provide opportunities to practice and receive feedback on activities and improve their performance. And multiple evidences of student performances are provided over time to build up a portfolio of competencies. Authentic assessments tend to need and have multifaceted scoring systems and have scoring criteria that are transparent to both the learner and the assessors. Authentic assessments often have, or ideally have, self-assessment as part of that. So students evaluating their own abilities, as this is something that's going to be a fundamental skill they'll require in the outside world. And finally, reliability and defensibility of the scoring of student performance or the work they've achieved through social moderation between individuals and collaborative assessment is a key hallmark for effective authentic assessments. We'll take these through in stages because these also link to a range of other elements of the EAT framework. Firstly, authentic assessment is realistic and replicates how a student's knowledge, skills and/or dispositions are assessed in a real-world context. For example, how many essays will your student write after they graduate if essays are a common activity within your particular discipline? There's very strong links here with subdimension AL4, understanding the requirements of the discipline and the sorts of things that the student will need once they graduate. Secondly, authentic assessments require students to make good judgments and be creative and innovative in solving complex and non-routine problems or performing tasks under new and unusual situations. A third point is that authentic assessments enable students to deeply engage with the subject or the discipline through critical thinking and inquiry. This links quite strongly to all of the assessment literacy subdimensions of the EAT framework, in particular AL1, identifying what good looks like, AL2, understanding how assessments fit together, and AL4, which is understanding the requirements of the discipline and what does a deep approach look like within a particular discipline. The fourth point is students need to be given opportunities to rehearse and practice and look for useful resources and receive timely feedback and quality feedback so as to improve the quality of their product or their performance or the activity that they're doing. A good way of thinking about this is reconceptualizing assessment as an assignment. So the assessment becomes an assessment for learning or assessment as learning activity, and the students are doing a process in order to get an outcome that's assessed. And the process itself, as well as the outcome, can be part of that assessed approach. Fifth point of requiring multiple evidences of student performance over time and explaining the reasons or explanations behind the different levels awarded for those performances is really, really important. This links very much to the idea of subdimension AF2, of identifying early opportunities for feedback and early opportunities for support being provided to students, and also to subdimension AL3, which is looking at identifying student roles and responsibilities and entitlements within assessment. There's a range of different ways in which you can have this multiplicity of providing student performance and evaluation of student performance. You can have scenario-based activities, you could have plans or case studies or portfolios or critical observations. Portfolios in particular are quite useful as it provides a stepwise approach of students showing their increasing and their developing competence over time. The key thing with this is that you're providing ongoing formative feedback that helps the student learn that skill and learn that skill in a relevant and authentic context. Having a multifaceted scoring system and clear and transparent marking criteria is very, very important. That links again to subdimension AL1, identifying what a good outcome looks like, and AD1, identifying robust and transparent assessment procedures. Student self-assessment is a very, very powerful way of learning and is absolutely something that will be a key skill they will require outside of a taught academic environment. So embedding that in your assessment activities as an authentic assessment is absolutely fundamental, and that leads very strongly to subdimension AF4, which is embedding self-assessment in the assessment process, and also to subdimension AF3, which is embedding peer assessment and peer feedback in order to develop those self-assessment skills. So self-assessment is really important, but peer assessment should also play a pivotal role within that assessment activity. And finally, the reliability or defensibility of that professional judgment and scoring process needs to be considered. So there needs to be, if it's an authentic assessment, an interaction between the academics who are judging and evaluating the work, professionals as to what the expectations are for a good quality product within that work, and both of those then need to interact with the student so the student has an understanding of both of those elements. In order to develop authentic assessment activities, we might be required to change our practices, in some cases quite considerably. So the first element, in order to design an authentic test, we first have to decide what are the actual performances that we want our students to do and be good at. So we often might need to change our concept of what we're assessing and why we're assessing it. So based on our experience and our professional judgment, what are the skills we're trying to develop in our students, and are we assessing those skills in the right way? A key thing is that authentic assessment is real, so if students don't see the relevance of that activity, they won't engage with it. And most of our criterion reference tests are inadequate for that purpose because they're usually aligned to things that aren't real activities and aren't tangible activities for the students, and so those cues then become artificial and difficult for them to align with real world activities. So we need to think, are we devising abstract assessments that have actually no basis in reality, and therefore causing challenges and problems for our students, and then relating those to real life? And finally, authentic assessment has to have a purpose, and it has an actual purpose in developing skills and developing useful activities that the students are able to do. So authentic tests are contextualized, they're complex in their individual and intellectual challenges, they're not fragmented or static tasks that don't have relationship to each other. So we need to think of the real and clear context to our assessments, and to make sure that the students understand how the assessment links to how they will adapt and use that skill in real life. And we need to think, are we always making it clear to students why we're assessing them in a particular way and what relevance that assessment has to them? In some cases, that's a very difficult thing to justify. So authentic assessment is a useful and important assessment approach, but there are certain parameters that it needs to consider and certain restrictions that are placed on it in terms of an activity in order for it to be properly effective and useful to the student in terms of their lifelong learning.